Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and what I wanted to do is just kind of revisit and talk a little bit more about some of the differences between functional and class components, and how there really isn't that many differences anymore. Okay, I am going to be using a React CDN, so just so you guys know how to set this up for your own project. If you want to do this, you need these script tags at the top of your HTML file. These two you can go get from React, so if you go through the React documentation, get the latest CDN links. And this link for Babel, you'll get from just Google Babel CDN, get the latest link. And then the link to your JavaScript file has to have type text/Babel in it. That way it knows that Babel is going to translate the code in here to ES5 code. So you set that up at the top of your page and you'll be good to go. The other nuance with this is that you have to be running a local server. So you could use what's called light server. So you can just type in npm in your project folder. Just type in npm install light server. That's light-server, and I'll run that in just a second. Let me just get into this folder. So this is playground 2. Copy full path. Let's cd into that folder. Cool. And I'm in that folder, so I can do light server. There's other different sort of like servers you can run. There's, I think, HTTP client or server. There's a few of them that do the same thing. It just allows you to spin up a quick server in any folder. Light server, I installed it globally, so I can just call it from any folder. So light server. If I do that, it's just gonna basically make a server happen. So it's coming. Just give it a minute. I think it's gonna do it on port 3000. Is it port 3000? Let's see what it says. Inject file server. It's getting to it. It's not there yet. There we go. Localhost 3001. Okay. It's just going to be a blank file because there's nothing in there really yet. There might be an H1 in there. Let me think here. Title. No, there's nothing here. Okay. So in setting up your React project, again, make sure there's a div here that has the ID root. Just because that's going to be where we inject our React code. And then we go to our index JavaScript. At the very bottom, you're going to want to put this line of code, React DOM, which calls the React DOM library. We're going to call the render function from it. What the render function does, it takes 2 arguments. It takes some JSX, which could be a component, or some HTML. It could be anything, as what it's going to inject. So it's, in this case, we're injecting the app component. And then here it tells you where to inject it. It's going to inject it at an element where the ID is root, that div that we did. You could actually I could have multiples of these and then render different stuff in different places if I wanted to. But the standard way of using React is you start with an app component that injects itself to a root ID. It's just the way it's typically done. You don't have to do it that way. Okay, so now I'm onto our main show. So here is my app component. I set it up as a class component. So that the way you do that is you do class app extends React component. Now the benefit of a class component is you have access to what's called state. State is an internal variable. So the thing in React is you want to think about where is the data coming from. Is it coming from the outside, coming in, which generally is referred to as props. So something else is going to give me that data, usually some sort of parent component. Or is the information something I'm going to figure out inside, internally? Like, this is something that's inside the component. Then it's going to be stored in state. And the benefit of state is that whenever state changes, it is going to force that component to re-render, which will re-render all of its children. So if you imagine your website like a tree of of nodes or of DOM elements, basically the state down is what will re-render. This is why you generally want to have your state variables as low in the element tree as possible, because the whole benefit of React is that you don't have to re-render your whole website. So if you put too much state in app, then you're re-rendering pretty much your whole page every time, which is kind of ruins the point. Okay. So how would so in my constructor, I can create state. And how do you do that? You just do this, and you actually don't even need to do this .state anymore. So you can actually just save yourself time and you can actually do this. State equals, okay, state equals, I'll say, number 5. Okay, there's my state. Let me save this. I'll show you that that works now. React has changed over the years and fixed up a lot of these really annoying things. Okay, so if I refresh, and then I hit Control-Shift-I so we can see what's going on, I have my React DevTools, which are over here. Failed to load resource or respond with status 404 not found. We'll come back to that. Okay, yep, so here's my component app. I click on that, and see, it notices the state number 5. So you don't have to use the constructor anymore. You used to, you don't now. It'll actually, they actually built it in so it'll pick up on the, if you use just the word state, it'll know, okay, it's this. Technically because, and here's the reason why, they basically, before, state wasn't part of React.component. So what you used to do is you'd create a constructor. Oh, I deleted all sorts of stuff there. Oh, what's going on? My keyboard. Something's off. There we go. So you would create a constructor, which would then take in props. Okay, the reason is because the constructor has parameters that represent information that's going to be passed to it when you create the class. And whenever basically whenever any component is rendered, there's this object called props that's passed in. So for these class components, it's passed into the constructor. For the function components, it's going to be passed in as a parameter of the function. So you have this constructor. Now again, this is not a standalone class. This class is an extension of the React.component class. So this is a class that already exists. You don't realize it, but there's stuff in that class. And props was already defined in that class. That's why you have to do, you used to have to do this. Super props. Because the props was already defined as part of the constructor in React component. And you would have to define your own state. So you had to be like this dot state equals whatever. You don't have to do that anymore because they finally figured out, I was like, why don't we just have state already part of the component definition? So basically, state is already part of your component because it's now already defined here in the component, in your parent component, or in your parent class. So you can just go state. It knows what you're referring to. Okay, I'm surprised it took them that long to figure that one out. Although this whole, give them credit, this whole framework is genius in a lot of the way it's architected. So not to be too hard, just making things easy for the people. Okay, so you could just define state like this. But that doesn't fix the problem that, like, if you're doing on-click events, when you're calling like a class method, you have to use the this keyword. So when you're defining your class here, your component, you have to be like this dot function, this dot variable. And the problem is if you pass a function as an on-click method or an on-change method, that's sort of linked to some sort of other element. So you're saying, hey, this button, when it gets clicked, run this function. So then this is no longer the app component. This becomes that button, which totally screws up your code. So what you used to have to do is you had to bind, you'd have to do something like this. You have to be like, let's say you created some sort of function, my func, and then you created your function. Well, you wanted to make sure that if people use the function, that it's bound to app, that it's considering it's the app's function, not the button's function. So then what you have to do is you'd have to do something like this dot my func equals this dot my func dot bind this. And what that's doing is saying, hey, this function, now when you use this variable, this symbol here, it represents that function bound to this instance of the class. So even if we pass it to a button now, the button isn't going to be saying really this, it's going to be saying a bound this. It's kind of I can imagine what that means, but it's hard to articulate it. So that's really annoying. But people dealt with it because if you wanted to, back in the day, if you were to do a function component, so this is how a function component would look like. Const, we'll say func component, or you'll just say func component. And then you just do an arrow function. You don't have to. You'd pass in props. Because again, you don't have to call it props, theoretically. For a function component, I could change this to like cheese. And then everywhere I would normally use props would just be cheese. But that would be confusing, and not someone who reads your code would not know what's going on. So the convention is to say props. So it would be like this, dot props. And, oh, wait, it's an arrow function. So it'd be like that. And then you would just return your JSX. So h1 hello world. And that's pretty much it. That's all a function component did. It was great because it was simple. Problem is there's no state. So if I want to trigger a re-rendering of the component, I can't. There's no state for me to change. So that was sort of the reason why people use class components for a very, very long time. Even though they hated this whole having to bind this and all that fun stuff. But recently they came out with something called React hooks, which allows you to create state. And the great thing is you don't have to call it state. You can call it whatever you want. The way it works is you would just do const, and then let's say you just wanted to make it like normal state, you would just do state. So the first parameter, or this first item in my array is the name of the variable, so state. And then what I haven't talked about is that there's a function. So when you use state, there's a separate function to change the value of your state. It's called set state. The reason you have to use that function, so anytime you want to change so let's say in this function here, I wanted to change the state, I would not do this dot state equals whatever. I would have to do set state, and then in the parentheses, I would detail what I changed my state to. The reason is that function is not just changing the value of your state, it's actually invoking a re-render of the component. It's deciding, oh, we need to not just change the value of this, we need to redo the whole component so that way it reflects any changes to the state. Okay, so that's why if you don't do set state, your component will not change. Only if you use the set state function, because baked into that function is the re-render. So you have to have that function too. So here you have to name it. So I can just name it set state like normal. But I could also do something like this. I could do cheese and call it set cheese. And that would work just like state. Because it doesn't matter what you call it, the next part's what's important. I have to say equals react dot use state, which I think is, I'm assuming is a class. I'm not quite sure how use state is constructed. So what it would do is just to make this a property and make this a method of this new use state. But now you have state. So now wherever I would use, and then actually in this parentheses I would then define the state. So I would say, hey, you know, number 5. So it's I put an empty an object in there with the number 5. So if I wanted to, I can now go like this. Cheese dot number. Okay. And then here, we'll also put something else here. We'll say props dot name. Now, where did that name come from? You don't see me defining a name variable anywhere in here. Props have to be given to the component. So over here, we'll just call that component. What we called it, func component, I think it was. Yep. And I'm gonna give it a prop name, because prop is short for properties, like an HTML property. When you're doing like an HTML tag, you might do like a CSS property and say class equals this. That's all it's saying. So you could literally pass anything through here. Name equals Alex. I can do cheese equals cheese. Okay. Make sure it's a closing tag. It always has got to be closing. Z. Okay, save. Okay, I could just go on and just keep making up more properties, and what it does, it gets bundled up into an object called props that gets passed in, and that's why we had to say props here, so that way that object that's passed in as a parameter has a name that we can use in the function. Okay, I mean, again, technically I can call props cheese2 if I want to, and instead of props.name, I'll just do cheese2.name, and it'll work. So save. Let's just show you that, again, it's just convention. Let's see. Oh, did I refresh yet? Components. I think it's 3001. That's right. I'm looking at something else. What's this? I don't know what that is, but let me go take a look at that server again. External UI internal. Oh, I see. So it is 3000. So let's go back to 3000. Something's weird. It's not picking up my component. So let me, because not even app's not showing up. So let's see here. Have that element, index.html, root. Okay, it was just complaining because for some reason the number I had in state had disappeared. So I just had to add it back in. So let's take a look if we're good now. And so far it looks good. Nope. That's what it says. Token, state. Still complaining about my state, even though it was working just a second ago. Let's take a look at this carefully. This state, this func, this func. Oh yeah, let me get rid of this. This is by mixing it up a little bit. Let me get rid of that as well. So all confusing it. Okie dokie. Well, I'm just going to get rid of this for now because we don't need it. Save. Cool. So the hello 5 Alex. So even though, okay, I changed the name of props to cheese 2, by doing that, I could still call props that way because again, it's just an object that's being passed in when in the function. That's all props is. So you can call it whatever you want. And then again, even though I named my state cheese, I can still call on it. So the point is that the word state, the word props isn't magical. It's a convention, but it's an important convention because it makes your code much more readable. But now with the use of hooks, again, setting up your state like this, doing this pattern, you can have your state in a function component, and then you don't have to worry about binding this. Okay? That just gets thrown out the window. The other thing that was a problem with class components is that if you wanted to do an API call, you'd have to use like a lifecycle function. Okay, and these would be a function that we call like something like component will mount. Okay, and then you would have to define the function, and then basically what would happen is that whatever you want to happen when the component renders, so let's say like get information from an API, you'd put it in there. But functions, we don't have anything to do that with. Till now, they did a hook for that too. So the way this one works is you would just do react dot use effect. That's the hook that replaces lifecycle functions. And then you would just put a callback inside of that, or an arrow function inside of that, and just say what you want to happen. Okay, but keep in mind, if you just do this, it's like a mix of component will mount and component will update, which means whatever you put in there, it's not going to just happen when the component renders, but it's going to happen every time it updates. So what if you want it to only happen the first time when it mounts? Then you have to do this. Why you have to do this, that I don't quite understand. But it works. You have to add like a second parameter, which is an empty array. In that case, it will only do this one time when the component mounts. So this replaces lifecycle functions. This replaces state. So with these two things, these two React hooks, you no longer really need to use class components. Okay? So why were there function and class components? Because once upon a time, you didn't have this. Okay, that wasn't a thing. Now it is a thing, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. So there's no need for this. And you don't have to worry about binding this and all that stuff. So that's the difference between function and class components. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great one. Enjoy. This is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com.